The footage was already playing when senior historian Driven Kahl entered the amphitheater. He paused at the threshold. The room was full 216 officers from the Veshtari Combined War College, seated in curved tiers of polished gray stone, their attention locked on the holographic display that dominated the far wall. The display showed a grainy tactical overlay of a river valley on Kelly's 4, time-stamped 11 years ago. Small blue markers moved in coordinated formations across the northern ridgeline. Smaller red markers, the Veshtari positions, flickered along the valley floor. Driven had watched this footage 400 times. He had annotated every frame. He had built his entire third-year seminar around the 11-day engagement it depicted. He still did not fully understand what had happened in that valley. The room's proctor, a young lieutenant named Sarath, spotted him at the door and straightened. "Senior historian, the cadets are ready." "They always think they are," Driven said, and descended the stone steps to the lectern. The lectern was a raised platform at the amphitheater's center, ringed by the tiered seating, with a display console that gave him control of the holographic projector overhead. He set his data tablet on the console, adjusted his academic sash dark blue over gray, the colors of the Veshtari Historical Warfare Division, and looked out at the rows of faces watching him. They were young. Most had never seen combat. Most believed they understood it. Several had notebooks open and styluses poised, the posture of students preparing to record facts. Driven wondered how many of them would still be writing by the end. "Pause the footage," he said. The holographic display froze on a single frame, a wide-angle shot of the Kelly's 4 Valley at dawn, the northern ridge black against a pale sky, the Veshtari encampment visible as a cluster of angular prefabricated structures along the river's eastern bank. Driven studied the frozen image for a moment, then turned to the amphitheater. "You were told this seminar concerns adaptive doctrine and asymmetric engagements," he said. His voice carried easily in the stone-walled chamber, low and precise, each word measured. "That is partially true. What this seminar actually concerns is a phenomenon for which the Veshtari Combined Tactical Index has no classification. The footage you are watching is the only surviving field record of a complete human adaptive cycle observed in real time. I have spent 11 years studying it, and I will share my findings with you today. And when I am finished, you will understand why I requested that this seminar be reclassified from elective to mandatory." He tapped a command on his console. The frozen image shifted, pulling back to reveal the broader tactical map of the Kelly's 4 Theater, a narrow river valley flanked by 2 ridgelines, running north-south for approximately 40 kilometers. Blue markers, the human force, held the northern ridge. Red markers, the Veshtari Expeditionary Battalion, held the valley floor and the southern approach. Kelly's 4, a mineral extraction dispute. The Veshtari 7th Expeditionary Battalion, 1,200 combat personnel, full armor support, orbital fire authorization, signals dominance across the entire electromagnetic spectrum, was deployed to secure extraction rights along the Kelly's River basin. The human presence was a colonial security detachment, 143 personnel, light infantry, no armor, no orbital support, no artillery heavier than a shoulder-mounted launcher. Their commanding officer was a colonial militia captain named Adiola Mensa, whose previous assignment had been supervising agricultural pest control on a farming settlement. He let the numbers settle. The cadets shifted in their seats, and Driven could read the calculation in their expressions. 1,200 against 143, full armor against light infantry, orbital fire against shoulder launchers, a professional military against farmers. The math was not close. "You are performing the calculation that Commander Yesrin Toyle performed 11 years ago," Driven said. Commander Toyle was a veteran of 3 campaigns. He had a tactical efficiency rating in the 92nd percentile. He had commanded the suppression of 2 colonial resistance movements, both resolved within 72 hours. He looked at the same numbers you are looking at now and reached the same conclusion you are reaching. He paused. Commander Toyle was dead by day 9. The amphitheater was quiet. Dreven let the silence hold for 3 seconds, then advanced the footage. Day 1. The 7th Expeditionary established a forward operating base along the eastern riverbank here. He highlighted the cluster of structures. Standard perimeter configuration. Standard sensor grid 96 nodes in overlapping thermal and motion detection arcs. Standard communications architecture with rotating encryption protocols. Commander Toyle deployed 3 reconnaissance drones over the northern ridge to locate the human positions and develop targeting data for a swift resolution. The footage showed the drones launching sleek, silent Veshtari long-range surveillance units, each 1 meter across, their sensor packages capable of detecting thermal signatures through 60 centimeters of solid rock. They climbed in formation, their navigation lights winking as they cleared the tree line and rose over the ridge. The drones crossed the ridgeline at 3:40 local time. At 3:42, all 3 went dark. A murmur passed through the amphitheater. Dreven waited for it to subside. The drones were not shot down. They were not jammed. Their telemetry feeds simply stopped transmitting. Recovery teams found them 2 days later, intact, sitting on the ground in a neat row with their sensor pods facing the valley positioned, quite deliberately, so that they appeared to be watching the Veshtari camp. The humans had not destroyed them. They had captured them mid-flight, extracted their sensor data, including the full encryption architecture of the 7th Expeditionary's communications network, and then set them down, powered off, arranged with a care that suggested the arrangement was itself a communication. He paused. This is the first thing I need you to understand about human adaptive behavior. They did not simply neutralize the drones. They studied them. They extracted every piece of information the drones contained, cataloged what was useful, and then returned them intact. The act of returning them was not mercy. It was a message. It said, "We have taken everything of value from these, and we want you to know it." A cadet in the 3rd row Dreven could see his rank insignia. A junior tactician raised a hand. Senior historian. What specifically did they extract from the sensor data? An excellent question. We did not know at the time. Commander Toyle's intelligence officer, Lieutenant Farin, performed a security audit and determined that the drone's capture represented a minor intelligence compromise. His assessment concluded that the humans had likely obtained imagery of the Veshtari camp useful but not critical. He recommended changing the primary encryption codes and proceeding with operations. Dreven tapped the console again. A second window opened beside the tactical map, a dense grid of communications metadata scrolling through thousands of data points. Lieutenant Farin's assessment was wrong. The humans had not merely captured imagery. They had extracted the complete encryption key generation algorithm embedded in the drone's communication firmware. This algorithm was the foundation of every secure transmission the 7th Expeditionary would make for the remainder of the engagement. Lieutenant Farin changed the encryption codes at 600 on day 2. By 6:14, the humans had broken the new codes. We know this because at 6:17, a human operator broadcast a single message on the 7th Expeditionary's internal command frequency. He brought the message up on the display. "Your new codes use the same key generation algorithm. We have it. Recommend you stop changing CODES and start changing algorithms." Nobody in the amphitheater moved. "This message was technically helpful advice," Dreven said. "Commander Toyle did not take it. He changed the algorithm. The humans broke the new algorithm in 4 hours. He changed it again. They broke it in 2 hours. He changed it a 3rd time. They broke it in 40 minutes. He tried a 4th algorithm, a reserve protocol from the fleet archives that had never been field deployed. They broke it in 11 minutes. He advanced the timeline. By the end of Day 2, the 7th Expeditionary Signals Division had exhausted its entire library of encryption protocols. Everyone had been compromised. The humans had not attacked. They had not fired a single shot. They had not advanced from their positions. They had simply demonstrated, methodically and without apparent effort, that every layer of communication security the 7th Expeditionary possessed was transparent to them. Driven paused and looked at the rows of cadets. Their expressions had changed. The easy confidence of numerical superiority was gone. Something else had replaced it, not fear, not yet, but the first quiet stirring of uncertainty. Several of the notebook styluses had stopped moving. "I want to be precise about something," he said. The humans did not possess superior technology. Post-engagement analysis confirmed that their communications equipment was commercial-grade colonial hardware, 2 generations behind current Veshtari military specifications. Their decryption capability was not a function of processing power. It was cognitive. A human studied the algorithm's structural logic, identified the mathematical assumptions embedded in its key rotation pattern, and extrapolated the entire key space faster than the algorithm could cycle through it. He brought up a personnel file. The image showed a young human woman, early 30s, dark skin, close-cropped hair, a faded colonial security uniform with a signals patch on the shoulder. She was looking slightly off-camera, her expression one of mild distraction, as though she had been interrupted while thinking about something else entirely. Specialist Nadira Akoro, colonial signals technician. Before the Kellys 4 deployment, her most notable professional achievement was repairing a satellite relay on a farming colony. She had no military cryptographic training, no advanced mathematics education. She broke our encryption architecture in her spare time, between guard shifts, using a handheld terminal and what we later determined was a cup of something called coffee. Her method, which she described in her after-action notes, was, and I am quoting directly, just looking at the pattern until it made sense. Driven closed the personnel file and let the silence hold for a beat before returning to the tactical map. Day 3. Commander Toyle, recognizing that his communications were compromised, shifted to hardline-only internal communications and launched the first offensive action, a probing attack on the human positions along the northern ridge. The footage showed the attack, a company-strength element, approximately 200 Veshtari troops in standard formation, advancing up the northern slope under covering fire from vehicle-mounted beam weapons positioned along the riverbank. The advance was textbook. Fire and maneuver teams leapfrogged forward. Suppressive fire swept the ridge crest. Drone surveillance, new drones, freshly encrypted with a handshake protocol that the Signals Division swore was unbreakable, provided real-time overhead imagery. The attack was repelled in 18 minutes, Driven said. The Veshtari assault element suffered 31 casualties, including 9 killed. The human force suffered 0 casualties. 0. He advanced the footage frame by frame. Watch carefully. What I am about to show you is the first documented instance of what my research has designated the human adaptive response cycle. The tactical overlay showed the Veshtari advance, reaching the midpoint of the slope. Then, simultaneously, from 7 positions along the ridgeline that had not been visible on any sensor sweep, human fire erupted not in a simple defensive line, but in a precisely coordinated crossfire pattern that channeled the advancing Veshtari troops into a narrow kill zone between 2 rock formations. The cadets leaned forward. Some of them were tracking the geometry with their fingers, tracing the fire lanes on the air. "Now watch what happens when the assault element adjusts," Driven said. The Veshtari advance shifted left, angling away from the kill zone. 90 seconds later, the human fire pattern reconfigured new angles, new lanes, a new kill zone that exploited the leftward shift. The Veshtari adjusted again. The humans reconfigured again, faster this time. Each reconfiguration was more precise than the last, each one exploiting the specific weakness created by the Veshtari adjustment that preceded it. 7 distinct fire pattern configurations in 18 minutes, Driven said, each one a response to the Veshtari tactical adjustment that preceded it. The average interval between human reconfigurations was 2 minutes and 34 seconds. By the 6th reconfiguration, the interval had decreased to 1 minute and 41 seconds. They were getting faster. A different cadet raised a hand, a woman in the 5th row, senior year insignia. Senior historian. How were they communicating the pattern changes? If there were 7 positions spread across the ridgeline, they would need some form of coordination to execute simultaneous shifts. They were not communicating them. The amphitheater went still. Host engagement signals analysis found no radio traffic between the 7 human positions during the engagement. No hardline connections. No visual signaling. No audible commands. The positions were too far apart. The fire pattern reconfigurations were executed without explicit coordination. Each position independently read the Veshtari adjustment, independently determined the optimal response, and independently executed the same reconfiguration at approximately the same time. 7 minds reaching the same tactical conclusion simultaneously, without communication, under live fire. Driven let that register. He had watched senior tactical analysts go pale when they reached this point in his briefings. The cadets were not pale yet, but they were getting there. The woman who had asked the question was sitting very still, her stylus frozen above her notebook. The human term for this is reading the field, he said. It describes an instinctive, real-time assessment of tactical conditions that allows experienced human combatants to anticipate both the enemy's next action and their own unit's response to it without explicit communication. It is not telepathy. It is not technology. It is a cognitive capacity that emerges under sustained pressure and sharpens with experience, and our tactical models have no equivalent for it. He advanced to day 4. Commander Toyle adjusted. I want to emphasize that he was a competent officer. He recognized that direct assault on prepared positions was costly and shifted to a suppression and isolation strategy. He deployed sensor barriers along the base of the northern ridge to detect and interdict any human movement. He positioned snipers along the southern ridge to cover the river crossings. He established a cordon of surveillance drones at high altitude to prevent human resupply or reinforcement. The logic was sound. Seal the humans on the ridge, cut them off from water, food, and ammunition, and force them to either surrender or attack downhill into prepared defenses. The tactical overlay showed the cordon taking shape, a comprehensive net of sensors, weapons, and observation posts. Every approach to the ridge was covered. Every river crossing was watched. The cordon was the work of a professional military force applying its doctrine correctly. The cordon was fully operational by 1800 on day 4. By 200 on day 5, the humans had already passed through it twice. Driven showed the sensor logs. 2 gaps, one at 2240, one at 115 each, lasting less than 90 seconds. During those gaps, the sensor net had not malfunctioned. It had not been jammed or spoofed. The humans had observed the sensor sweep's timing cycle from the ridge, likely using the technical specifications they had extracted from the captured drones on day 1, identified a 2-second overlap gap where adjacent sensor cones did not quite intersect, and threaded personnel through those gaps at a dead sprint. The first transit was a 4-person team that crossed the river, entered the 7th Expeditionary's logistics compound, bypassing 2 perimeter guards who were subsequently found asleep at their posts with no memory of having lost consciousness, and removed 47 kilograms of ration packs, 12 liters of medical fluid, a replacement battery for a communications relay, and a Veshtari language dictionary. They left a note on the logistics officer's desk. The note read, "Thank you. The rations are better than ours." A sound rippled through the amphitheater, something between a gasp and a disbelieving exhalation. Dreven had heard it before. Every audience made that sound at this point. He waited for it to subside. The second transit was a two-person team that accessed the 7th Expeditionary's vehicle maintenance bay, removed the targeting calibration modules from 3 armored vehicles, and replaced them with components that appeared identical but had been subtly modified. The modifications were not detectable by standard diagnostic scans. They were calibrated to introduce a progressive drift in targeting alignment that would not manifest until the weapons were fired at sustained power. The modifications were not detected for 2 days. When the vehicles were deployed on day 7, their beam weapons fired 11 degrees off-axis. The resulting friendly fire incident wounded 4 Veshtari soldiers and destroyed a supply truck. Dreven brought up Commander Toyle's log entry for day 5. The commander's handwriting, normally precise and controlled, had become heavier. The strokes pressed deeper into the writing surface. Day 5 entry verbatim: "The sensor cordon has been compromised. Method of compromise unclear. The humans penetrated our logistics compound without triggering any alert. They took supplies. They left a note. This was not a raid for resources. They have enough food on the ridge to last weeks. I know this because they stole our inventory manifest along with the rations and helpfully corrected 2 counting errors in the margin. This was a demonstration. I have ordered a full security review and doubled the watch on all interior facilities. I am beginning to understand that the force on that ridge is not what our initial assessment described." He advanced the timeline. Days 5 through 7 unfolded in a cascade of adjustments and counter-adjustments, each one faster than the last. Commander Toyle reinforced the sensor cordon with additional nodes, eliminating the timing gap. The humans found a new vulnerability within hours. The sensor node's ground-penetrating radar could not distinguish between solid rock and rock that had been hollowed from beneath. They had dug a narrow passage under the sensor line, using hand tools, through 3 meters of limestone. He deployed motion-activated weapons platforms along the river crossings. The humans triggered them with thrown rocks from 400 meters away, recorded the firing patterns and angles, mapped every platform's position and field of fire, and then disabled them one by one with improvised electromagnetic pulses built from components salvaged from their own colony's agricultural equipment. Each EMP device was different. None used the same design twice. He sent scout teams to the northern ridge at night, 3-person reconnaissance units trained in stealth approach. 2 teams came back without having found anything. They reported that the ridge appeared empty, that the human positions had vanished. The 3rd team did not come back at all. Its 3 members were found the next morning, alive and unharmed, sitting in a clearing at the base of the ridge with their weapons disassembled and neatly arranged in front of them. Their communications equipment had been returned intact, but every frequency in its memory had been replaced with a recording of human folk music. The scout team's sergeant, Dreven said, later submitted a formal report in which he described the experience of being rendered unconscious, moved, and disarmed without any memory of the event. His exact phrasing was, "I went asleep in the field. I woke up sitting down with my rifle in pieces in front of me. I do not know how this happened. I do not believe anyone who tells me they know how this happened. I am requesting reassignment to a sector where the enemy has the decency to let me see them before they defeat me." A ripple of something that might have been nervous laughter moved through the amphitheater. Dreven did not smile. The sergeant's request was denied. By day 7, 17 similar requests had been filed across the 7th Expeditionary. Major Desren, the executive officer, began maintaining a separate log tracking what she called confidence erosion events. By day 7, her log contained 43 entries. By day 9, it contained 111. Day 8, Dreven slowed the footage and brought up a communications log that showed a series of exchanges between Commander Toyle and Veshtari Fleet Command in orbit. On Day 8, Commander Toyle submitted a formal request for orbital fire support. The request was approved. A Veshtari strike cruiser in high orbit, the Tesseran, was assigned to provide precision bombardment of the northern ridge positions. The strike was scheduled for dawn on Day 9. Commander Toyle's assessment was that the human force, however adaptable, could not adapt to having the ridge they occupied reduced to rubble from orbit. The amphitheater was very quiet now. The cadets understood what orbital fire support meant. Directed energy salvos from a warship's main battery, each one capable of excavating a crater 40 meters across. Against a light infantry force with no armor, no hardened bunkers, and no orbital defenses, it was not a weapon. It was an erasure. The Tesseran began its bombardment run at 5:40 on Day 9. At 5:38, 2 minutes before the first salvo, the Tesseran's fire control system received a software update. Dreven watched the comprehension move through the amphitheater like a wave. It started in the front rows, the senior cadets, the ones who had studied signals warfare, and rolled backward through the tiers as understanding spread. The update was disguised as a routine navigational correction from Veshtari Fleet Command. It passed through 3 layers of authentication verification. Because it was formatted using the encryption architecture the humans had captured from the reconnaissance drones on Day 1, the same architecture that Lieutenant Farin had classified as a minor intelligence compromise. The update modified the Tesseran's targeting coordinates by 0.07 degrees, small enough to pass automated validation checks, large enough to shift the bombardment impact zone from the northern ridge to an empty stretch of valley floor 3 kilometers south of any human position. He brought up the bombardment footage. Brilliant white flashes, one after another, walking across empty terrain in precise intervals. Dust and debris mushrooming into the pale morning sky. Tremendous destructive energy, the full fury of a warship's main battery, expended on rocks and dirt and nothing. The Tesseran fired 17 salvos before the fire control error was detected and the bombardment was manually aborted. 17 orbital strikes on a patch of ground that contained nothing of value. The humans had not moved. They had not needed to move. They had not built shelters or dug bunkers or prayed for salvation. They had reached into a warship's targeting computer from the surface of a planet, through captured encryption keys, using a piece of colonial communications equipment designed for agricultural satellite management, and redirected its fire. The entire operation was later attributed to Specialist Okoro, working alone, who described the process in her notes as tricky but interesting. The silence in the amphitheater had a different quality now. It was not the polite attention of students. It was the weighted quiet of people who had just been shown something that violated their understanding of how the universe worked. It was during the bombardment that Commander Toyle was killed, Dreven said. Not by the orbital fire, not by a human weapon. At 5:47, 7 minutes into the misdirected bombardment, while the command staff was focused on the bombardment's unexpected trajectory, a human team entered the 7th Expeditionary's command post through an access point that had been sealed with a blast door rated for direct artillery impact. He brought up the forensic analysis. Post-engagement forensics determined that the team had, over the preceding 3 days, returned to the command post's exterior 4 separate times. On the first visit, they mapped the blast door's locking mechanism. On the second, they removed a single interior bolt and replaced it with one machine from softer metal visually identical, functionally compromised. On the third visit, they repeated the process with a second bolt. On the fourth visit during the bombardment, they pressed the door open with their hands. The lock failed under manual pressure because it had been rebuilt, one component at a time, to fail exactly when they wanted it to. He brought up the post-engagement photograph. The command post interior, consoles smashed, tactical displays dark, communications equipment methodically disabled, not destroyed, disabled. Every cable cut cleanly at the junction, every routing box opened and its switching components removed. The disabling was surgical. It would take days to repair, but nothing was permanently damaged. The humans had preserved the option of using it themselves. Commander Toyle and 2 staff officers were killed in the breach. The human team used close-quarters methods. Medical examination determined that each wound was a single lethal strike, 1 per target, precisely placed. No secondary injuries, no collateral damage to equipment, no excessive application of force. 3 targets, 3 actions, 3 deaths. The team then disabled the communications equipment, severing the 7th Expeditionary's ability to coordinate with the Tesseract or with its own subordinate units, and withdrew. The entire action, ingress, execution, communications denial, egress, took less than 4 minutes. Driven paused the footage and stepped away from the console. He walked to the edge of the lectern platform and looked up at the tiered rows of cadets. Their faces were different now. The uncertainty had deepened into something heavier. Some of them were leaning forward, gripping the edges of their desks. Others had gone very still, the way people go still when they realize the ground under them is not as solid as they believed. "I want to address something you may be thinking," he said. "You may be thinking that the 7th Expeditionary was poorly led, that Commander Toyle made errors, that a more competent force, your force, perhaps, would have produced a different outcome." He clasped his hands behind his back. Commander Toyle made no errors. Every decision he made was doctrinally correct. His sensor cordon was properly designed. His assault tactics were appropriate for the force ratio. His request for orbital support was the logical escalation. He did everything right. That is what I need you to understand. He did everything right, and it did not matter, because the humans adapted to every correct decision faster than he could make the next one. The better his decisions were, the more the humans learned from them. He returned to the console and advanced the timeline. Days 9 through 11. With Toyle dead and the command post destroyed, the 7th Expeditionary's executive officer, Major Desren, assumed command. Desren was methodical. She consolidated the battalion's remaining 960 personnel into a tight defensive perimeter centered on the logistics compound and transmitted an extraction request via backup communications. The footage showed the perimeter taking shape, fortified positions, overlapping fields of fire, sensor nets, razor barriers. The remains of a professional military force digging in to hold until relief arrived. Extraction was authorized. A transport convoy was scheduled to arrive on day 13. Major Desren needed to hold for 48 hours. Driven brought up the next data set, a time-lapse view of the Veshtari perimeter over the 2 days between day 9 and day 11. What it showed was not an assault. There were no charges, no waves of attackers, no dramatic firefights. What it showed was an erosion. The humans did not attack the perimeter, he said. They dismantled it. Over 48 hours, in a sequence of actions so precisely calibrated that no single action was large enough to trigger an organized military response, the humans degraded every component of the 7th Expeditionary's defensive capability. Not with weapons, with knowledge. He listed the degradation slowly, letting each one register. Power generators, fuel lines severed during darkness, repairs completed by dawn, severed again the following night using a different access point that the repair crews had not secured. When the crews secured that access point, the humans severed the lines at a third location. When all exposed fuel lines were armored, the humans introduced a contaminant into the fuel reserve that reduced generator output by 30% over 12 hours slow enough that the decline appeared to be mechanical wear. Water purification. The intake valve was contaminated with a biological compound derived from local plant matter non-toxic to Veshtari physiology, but it produced a taste and color that made the purified water appear unsafe. 3/4 of the garrison refused to drink it until a medical officer ran a full analysis and confirmed it was harmless. That analysis took 6 hours. During those 6 hours, the garrison's water consumption dropped to 0. The morale effect was, in Major Disren's log, significant and ongoing. Sensor grid. Individual sensor nodes were not destroyed but repositioned, moved 15 to 20 centimeters from their calibrated positions, just enough to produce blind spots that were too small to appear on automated diagnostic checks, but large enough for a human to pass through. The repositioning was so subtle that, when the diagnostic team ran a manual inspection, they initially concluded the nodes were still in their original positions, and the blind spots were software errors. Ammunition stores, not stolen but inventoried. On the morning of day 10, every ammunition crate in the logistics compound had been opened, its contents counted, and a handwritten note left inside recording the exact count. Nothing was taken. One note left inside a crate of beam weapon charge packs read, "You have 4,216 of these. We counted twice. You miscounted by 3. The message was clear. We were here, we touched everything you depend on, we know exactly what you have, and you did not know we were here." Sidearm holsters. On day 10, 14 soldiers on the morning watch discovered that their sidearms had been removed from their holsters during the night, cleaned, reassembled, and returned. 3 of the 14 had been sleeping in sealed barracks with locked doors. The locks showed no signs of tampering. And finally, morale. On the evening of day 10, the humans broadcast a single transmission on the 7th Expeditionary's internal frequency. The transmission was a recording of a human soldier humming a melody. Post-engagement cultural analysis identified it as a lullaby, a song human parents sing to their children at bedtime. The broadcast lasted 4 minutes. It was gentle. It was peaceful. 3 sentries on the southern perimeter subsequently requested to be relieved from watch duty. Major Disren denied the requests. 7 more filed similar requests before dawn. Driven stopped and looked at the amphitheater. The cadets were silent, not the attentive silence of students absorbing a lecture. The pressed, heavy silence of people confronting something they did not want to be true. "I have spent 11 years studying this engagement," he said. "I have analyzed every data point, every log entry, every piece of post-engagement testimony. I have consulted with tactical analysts from 14 species. I have built simulation models that attempt to replicate the human adaptive response cycle. Every model fails. They fail because every model is built on a foundational assumption that is true for every species in our tactical database and false for humans." He brought up a single line of text on the holographic display, white letters against dark blue. The assumption, tactical adaptation follows a curve of diminishing returns. The more an adversary adapts, the slower and less effective each subsequent adaptation bcomes. "This is the bedrock of combined tactical doctrine," Driven said. "Every war college in Veshtari space teaches it. Every tactical simulation in our arsenal is built on it. Every force deployment model assumes it. It is true for every species we have ever studied. The Toresh adapt quickly at first, then plateau by the 3rd engagement cycle. The Brethkari adapt brilliantly in narrow domains but cannot generalize their innovations across tactical contexts. The Dasari, you studied them last term, adapt well under low pressure, but their adaptation rate collapses under sustained stress. This is the universal pattern. Adaptation is a finite cognitive resource that depletes under pressure." He paused. "Humans do not follow this curve." He brought up the data set he had spent 3 years compiling. A graph, 2 lines. The red line Veshtari adaptation rate rose steeply on days 1 and 2, as Commander Toyle's forces adjusted to initial contact conditions, leveled off on days 3 through 5 as the adjustments became incremental, and began to decline on day 6 as cognitive fatigue and morale erosion set in. The curve was textbook. It matched the predicted model within 4% at every data point. The blue line human adaptation rate rose on days 1 and 2, continued rising on days 3 and 4, steepened on days 5 through 7, and by day 9 was climbing at a rate that made the graph's vertical axis insufficient. A notation at the top read, scale adjusted. Human adaptation rate exceeded original graph parameters on day 8. Their adaptation rate does not diminish, Dreven said. It accelerates. The more pressure they are placed under, the faster they adapt. The more countermeasures deployed against them, the more countermeasures they develop in response. Each adaptation is not a diminished echo of the last, it is a refinement, incorporating everything they learned from every previous cycle. Day 1, they learn your encryption. Day 3, they learn your assault doctrine. Day 5, they learn your sensor architecture. Day 7, they learn your weapons systems. Day 9, they learn your orbital fire control protocols. Each lesson builds on the last. Nothing is forgotten. Nothing is wasted. By day 11 of the Kelly's 4 engagement, the human force of 143 was adapting to Veshtari countermeasures faster than the 7th Expeditionary's 960 remaining personnel could develop them. This graph was classified for 6 years, Dreven said. Not because it contained sensitive tactical data, because the Veshtari Combined Tactical Index did not know how to categorize what it showed. The graph violates the foundational assumption of adaptive rate modeling. It suggests, and 11 years of subsequent research have confirmed, that human adaptive capacity is not a finite resource that depletes under pressure. It is an emergent property that compounds under pressure. The harder you press, the faster they evolve. The more tools you use against them, the more tools they acquire from you. He closed the graph and stood in the quiet that followed. The 7th Expeditionary was extracted on day 13. Of its original 1,200 personnel, 814 were evacuated. 386 were casualties, 94 killed, 167 wounded, and 125 psychologically incapacitated. That last category is important. 125 soldiers who were physically capable of continuing the fight, but who could no longer function because of what Major Disren's final report called sustained adaptive overmatch demoralization. They had lost not because they were outfought. They had lost because they had run out of ideas faster than the humans could generate new ones, and they knew it, and the knowledge broke them. The Human Colonial Security Detachment suffered 11 killed and 29 wounded over the same period. Their defensive positions on the northern ridge were found, post-evacuation, to be extensive, sophisticated, and this is the detail that occupied my research for 3 years, continuously modified. Every position had been rebuilt multiple times during the engagement. Firing angles adjusted, cover reconfigured, approach routes altered. The positions the humans held on day 11 bore almost no resemblance to the positions they had occupied on day 1. They had rebuilt their entire defensive architecture while actively defending it, adapting not only their tactics but their physical infrastructure to counter each successive Veshtari approach. A cadet near the back, Dreven, could not see her rank insignia from this distance, spoke without raising her hand. Senior historian, if the adaptive rate accelerates without limit, what is the doctrinal counter? Dreven had been waiting for that question. He received it in every seminar, usually around this point. He had spent years formulating his answer, refining it, testing it against his own data and the objections of colleagues who desperately wanted the answer to be different. "There is no doctrinal counter," he said. The amphitheater stirred. A murmur ran through the rows, quickly suppressed. "I will be more precise," Dreven continued. Standard doctrinal counters assume that an adversary's adaptive capacity will eventually plateau, at which point superior numbers, firepower, or logistics can overcome the adaptation and restore the initiative. Against humans, this assumption produces a tactical plan that degrades faster than it can be executed. Each escalation, more troops, more firepower, more sophisticated countermeasures, does not suppress the human adaptation. It feeds it. The 7th Expeditionary's orbital bombardment did not destroy the human force. It taught them how to penetrate warship fire control systems. The sensor cordon did not contain the humans. It taught them the exact timing and geometry of Veshtari sensor architecture, knowledge they exploited for the remainder of the engagement. The scout teams did not gather intelligence on the humans. They provided the humans with live specimens to study and disarm. Every capability Commander Toyle deployed was not a weapon against the humans. It was a lesson for them. He pulled up one final piece of footage. It was not a tactical overlay or a data graph. It was a simple visual recording, recovered from a Veshtari surveillance drone on day 11. The footage showed a small clearing on the northern ridge, dawn light, morning mist threading through low scrub vegetation. In the clearing, a human woman Driven recognized her from the personnel files as Specialist Akoro, the signals technician who had broken the encryption architecture and redirected the orbital bombardment, sat on a flat rock, cross-legged, with a disassembled Veshtari sensor node spread across her lap. She was methodically removing its internal components, examining each one with careful attention, and placing the useful ones into a small pouch at her hip. Her movements were unhurried. Her expression was relaxed, attentive, mildly interested, the expression of a person engaged in a task they found neither difficult nor stressful but genuinely absorbing. A faint smile at the corner of her mouth. Behind her, 2 other human soldiers were rebuilding a section of defensive wall using a combination of local stone and repurposed Veshtari equipment, working in practice silence. One of them had a bandaged left arm. Neither looked tired. The footage ran for 47 seconds before the drone was detected and disabled gently, its flight surfaces manually folded, its power supply disconnected, its casing set on the ground without damage. This footage was taken on day 11, Driven said. 11 days into a confrontation with a force that outnumbered them 8-1, with full armor, orbital fire support, and signals dominance. The woman in this footage has, by this point, broken our encryption suite, penetrated our logistics compound, redirected our orbital bombardment, and studied enough of our technology to maintain, repair, and repurpose it. She is sitting on a rock, taking apart a sensor for useful components, and she looks like she is enjoying a quiet morning at work. He turned off the display. The amphitheater darkened except for the ambient lighting along the stone tiers and the soft glow of the console. The Kelly's 4 engagement was classified as a minor territorial dispute, Driven said. It appears in the Combined Tactical Index as a tactical setback attributed to unfavorable terrain and insufficient intelligence preparation. That classification is a lie. I do not say that lightly. I am a senior historian with 34 years of service to this institution. I say it because I have spent 11 of those years studying this engagement, and the classification does not describe what happened. What happened on Kelly's 4 was a 1,200-strong professional military force properly led, properly equipped, doctrinally correct, encountering a cognitive capability it had no framework to understand, no model to predict, and no doctrine to counter. He picked up his data tablet and held it at his side. I will share with you the conclusion of my formal analysis, which I submitted to the Combined Tactical Review Board 7 years ago, and which was accepted without comment and subsequently not distributed to field commands. His voice was level, controlled. But the cadets who had studied under him for months would recognize something in it, a tightness, a careful precision that he reserved for moments when he was saying something he believed the institution needed to hear and did not want to. The conclusion is this. The standard force deployment model assumes that escalation produces diminishing returns in the adversary and increasing advantage for the escalating force. Against humans, this relationship inverts. Escalation against a human force does not degrade their capability. It accelerates their adaptation. Each countermeasure deployed becomes a training input. Each tactical approach revealed becomes a vulnerability mapped. Each technology introduced becomes a technology studied, understood, and repurposed. The act of fighting humans makes them better at fighting you, and it does so at a rate that increases with every engagement cycle. He paused. The amphitheater was so quiet that Dreven could hear the faint electrical hum of the console beneath his fingers. The practical implication, the one the review board accepted and chose not to distribute, is that the most dangerous human force is not the one you have never engaged. It is the one you have been fighting for days. The longer the engagement, the more lethal they become. Every hour of contact compounds their advantage. A human force on day 1 is a tactical problem. A human force on day 11 is something our models cannot describe without exceeding their parameters. He looked at the dark display where Specialist Akoro had been sitting on her rock, calmly disassembling a piece of Veshtari technology, with the quiet focus of a person solving a puzzle that she found personally interesting. The formal recommendation in my analysis was a single sentence. I will read it to you now, because I believe you deserve to hear what the review board heard and chose to file without action. He opened his data tablet, though he did not need to read from it. He had written the sentence. He knew it by heart. In any engagement with human forces, the only tactical window in which conventional doctrine retains predictive value is the first 48 hours. After that interval, the engagement enters a domain for which no existing model provides reliable guidance, and the recommended course of action is immediate disengagement. He closed the tablet. Disengagement, he repeated. Not escalation, not reinforcement, not the introduction of superior technology or additional force multipliers. Disengagement. Because every additional hour of contact does not bring you closer to victory. It brings the humans closer to a version of themselves that your forces have never seen and cannot predict. He stepped back from the console and stood at the edge of the lectern platform, looking up at the 216 cadets who would one day command Veshtari forces in the field. I told you at the beginning that this seminar concerns a phenomenon for which we have no classification. I have spent 11 years trying to build one. The closest I have come is a phrase that does not satisfy me as a historian because it is not precise enough, but which every field commander I have shared it with has understood immediately. He clasped his hands behind his back. The phrase is this: humans do not have a learning curve. They have a learning acceleration. Everything we do to them teaches them. Everything they learn, they keep. And everything they keep, they compound. The amphitheater was still. 216 officers sat in their curved stone tiers and did not move. Dreven could read their faces well enough to see the weight settling in not the sharp shock of a sudden revelation, but the slow, heavy recognition of something they would carry for the rest of their careers. The understanding that the math did not work the way they had been taught, that the advantage of numbers and technology was not a permanent asset, but a depreciating one, bleeding value with every hour of contact against an adversary who converted engagement into education. One final note, Dreven said. He kept his voice steady, but he allowed himself the smallest pause before continuing. After the extraction, the Veshtari government negotiated a settlement with the Human Colonial Administration on Kelly's 4. The terms were unfavorable. The mineral extraction rights were ceded in full. A formal apology was issued. Reparations were paid. The negotiation took 4 hours. He looked down at his console, then back at the amphitheater. The human negotiator was Specialist Nadira Akoro, the same signals technician who had broken our encryption. infiltrated our compound, redirected our orbital bombardment, and personally disabled our command post's communications architecture. She attended the negotiation in civilian clothes, unarmed, and spoke fluent Veshtari, which she had taught herself during the engagement using a grammar manual and dictionary captured from our logistics compound on day 5. She negotiated terms that 3 career Veshtari diplomats later described as the most favorable extraction settlement in colonial history. He turned away from the amphitheater and began gathering his data tablet. Then he stopped and looked back over his shoulder. "She learned our language in 11 days, he said quietly, while fighting a war." The amphitheater remained silent. Driven gathered his materials, straightened his academic sash, and walked up the stone steps toward the exit. The cadets watched him go. None of them spoke. Behind him, the dark holographic display held the afterimage of a graph whose blue line climbed beyond the boundaries of the frame, and the empty amphitheater hummed with the faint sound of 216 officers reconsidering everything they had been trained to believe. Proctor Sareth was waiting at the door. The young lieutenant's face had the careful blankness of someone trying very hard not to show what he was feeling. "Senior historian," he said, "the third-year evaluations. The cadets will want to know what is the recommended doctrine for extended engagements with human forces." Driven looked at him. The proctor was young, 23, maybe 24, bright eyes, a career ahead of him. Decades of service in which he might, or might not, find himself commanding forces in a theater where humans were present. "The recommended doctrine," Driven said, "is to make the engagement unnecessary." He walked out of the amphitheater and into the corridor. Behind him, the proctor stood at the door for a long moment, then quietly closed it. The corridor was empty. Driven's footsteps echoed on the polished stone floor as he walked toward his office, his data tablet tucked under one arm. The weight of 11 years of research settled across his shoulders like something he could not set down, and was no longer sure he wanted to. In his office, he would file the seminar notes. He would update the attendance record. He would begin preparing for next term's iteration of the same seminar, the 20th time he would deliver it. And he would wonder, as he always did, whether this would be the year someone in a position of authority read his recommendation and acted on it. On his desk, beside the pile of ungraded examination papers, was a small object he kept as a reminder. A Veshtari sensor node, one of the 3 recovered from the northern ridge of Kelly's 4, intact, carefully powered down, placed in a neat row by hands that could have destroyed it but chose instead to return it. He picked it up sometimes when his office was quiet and the corridor outside was empty, and turned it over in his hands. The casing was smooth, undamaged. The seams where Specialist Okoro had opened it and extracted the encryption architecture were so precise that they were invisible to the naked eye. She had taken what she needed, closed the casing, and left it where it would be found. She had not needed to return it. Destroying the drones would have been simpler and would have denied the Veshtari the knowledge that their encryption had been compromised. Returning them was a choice, a specific, deliberate, considered choice. "We see how you work. We have learned what we need, and we want you to know that we learned it." Driven set the sensor node down on his desk and sat for a while in the quiet of his office, thinking about a species that treated every engagement as a classroom, every countermeasure as a curriculum, and every adversary as an instructor who did not yet understand what he was teaching.